Okay, so this is a version 2832 interface. There has been some updates since the last video that I did, so I'm updating it for people. If you've already played with it, then some of the first things I'll show might be interesting to you. Otherwise, if you've never used it before, you'll get everything from this video and you don't have to watch the other one. As usual, if you feel like I'm talking a little bit too quickly, it's to keep the video somewhat short, and you can always pause, try something, and then play again, or just jump back a little bit in the timeline. So the tools here are all kind of exposed. There's not a ton of stuff going on, but some things are not yet ready, so be aware that some things will be grayed out until they become available. But for now, let's take a look at some of the features that people will be most interested in. In particular, if you've had any license related issues, you want to be able to come here, and this will allow you to select a new license. So if a new license has been delivered to you, you can then of course select this and get that. The other common thing that people are looking for lately is the pop-out interface. So if we go to Viewport here, we have the attached Viewport, and it's on by default, which means this viewport here, so all of these buttons and features all within that rectangular area, can be popped out and rescaled on its own, leaving you with just the node tree and options along with the property panel. So you'll have then two windows, and you can spread them across two screens if you have two monitors. Other than that, within these preferences, all the features are immediately understandable for the most part. Anything that isn't understandable, you just hover over it and it will give you tooltips for them. A lot of these things, like for example, this default workflow says layers, and yet because I've been using Gaea for a while, it defaults into actually the graph node because that's what I use most frequently. So a lot of these things don't really need to be changed. You do have things to make stuff a bit more efficient, like you can change from routed polylines to simple Bezier, although that will end up looking a bit like spaghetti, and there are some settings to change the look of the curves that you get there. But currently the routed polylines, what it does is that it will take these lines between them and will make sure that they go up and around and over in order to try and create a clear visual path from one node to the next, rather than having them kind of overlap everything, which is what you often will see in a lot of node-driven software. Things like Nuke, Maya, etc. Can start to look a little spaghetti. So these routed paths try and find a path around the nodes and make a more visually clear graph to look at. So the viewport options, we have navigation, we're going to go into that in a moment. Preferences, these are not really available yet, and more is probably to come in the future. Over here, if you happen to be curious, we have things like check for updates on startup. Obviously a good idea. You want the new versions, it gives you the new features as well as the bug fixes. Remember that this is EAP is early access preview, meaning that it is still constantly being built on, and so those new updates can be hugely beneficial. Sending the anonymous data to CloudSpinner, of course, that goes along with those bug fixes. You want to make sure that information is sent to them, and if you do experience a crash, please do let them know, as that makes the software more stable for all of us. Some cases you'll get like a Watson error, which will save, and then you can email it to them. Closing that down, we have some other features in here, so things like the help and about, which are pretty straightforward. We have things like additional export options outside of the export tab, which is over here, and so this will export the entire terrain. I've never used this particular button. I do everything via output nodes and that, so you can use that, and I believe that will do the entire terrain as is, probably the current resolution, or the current preview, which I suspect is when you click on a specific node, it will output what it sees in the viewport. That said, you probably want to do everything from the export panel with output nodes anyways. These, for the most part, are also found here with some subtle differences. So you have new, that's new, open, open, save is also save, that's fine. We have this iterative save, which will do save version 1, version 2, version 3, and you'll notice that this is currently set to untitled. Once you save, it'll change the name to what you're currently calling it, and then this will add a 1 and then a 2 and so on to it. Open recent, of course, to pick up any kind of recent files that you've been using. And then the save as is when you don't want to just add a new number. Let's say you're doing something like creating a cool feature for a landscape, and you want to do a distinctly different version of that same landscape. Chances are you don't just want to iterate numbers, you want to call it something different. So you take a mountain, turn it inside out, it's no longer a mountain, it's a canyon, so you want to change the name. So that's what save as is for. Moving right along, we have the tessellation value here. So this is polygons, so how many polygons are used to create this detailed scene. It goes up to 2K, but you start at 512. And it's just the overall resolution of the polygons that are there. If you change these, of course, each time you do that, it will update all the information, so rebuild information that's there, so be aware of that when you do it. Just below that is the lighting. So you can left click and drag on this to change the lighting around. So that moves the lighting and shadows. If I hold down Alt and left mouse button, I can navigate this viewport. And with or without Alt, if I use the wheel, it will zoom in and out. I'm now going to click on this, which will bring in my atmosphere, which I see the horizon line here. I have my water level, which I can play with and bring in the water. I'm just going to turn those off. We have other quality settings. So outside of the polygon limit, we have settings that turn on and off specific features of the viewport, things like quality of shadows and so on and so forth. And so you can do this for performance-related issues. The button right below it will turn off some of these icons along the sides here to make it easier to do a screenshot without a whole bunch of stuff in the way. In order to take those screenshots, you move one down to this area, and you'll notice that you have take a screenshot of the viewport, take a screenshot of the graph. There's some other features that we'll get back to in a moment. Just going to turn that back on. You have a variety of different preview shaders, things inspired by ZBrush and others that are different kinds of textures, and of course like a Lambert and a Blinn kind of feature here. These textured versions, while looking cool, do not impact the actual geometry. They just give the illusion of more detail. To appreciate that detail in greater levels, you can change the view mode from this standard mode, which is the Alt navigation, to this, which changed the navigation mode to just left clicking instead of orbiting. It's first person look, and you use first person keys in order to navigate with them. So W to move forward, S to move back, A to the side, D to the other side. So WASD, and then of course Q to go up and E to go down. So W, A, S, D, Q, E. That's all with left mouse button dragging to navigate. So if I get down in here, you can see that tiling texture that's here, and we can get in maybe a little bit closer to my little mountain range, be able to see some of the other textures peeking through here and there. And you line it up, and then you take your screenshot. This next button down here moves to sort of an orthographic 2D view, which means a straight down view without any perspective applied to it. It's still lit and textured. And again, those textures don't export with this. It's just for preview purposes. Switch back to that mode. Additional 2D modes come from this right here. And if we click on this with something selected, so we have to have something selected for this to work, it will give us a 2D view of the current state of that. If we click on this button, it will bring up the red for the higher areas. We can switch that to just a pure height map information, where it's just black and white. And of course, to view it with the correct levels, you can click on this and you notice it gets darker because it's not going to the maximum height that's available. Turn those off. And there's not much going on here at the moment, probably more later. You can also access that from right here. Same feature, brings up that window. In addition to that, we have things like showing the grid and of course snapping to the grid should you desire. I'm going to turn that off. And if you're not happy with the snapping, that happens when we move these things around, where you see these alignments occur with various nodes. You can of course turn that off here as well. Moving these around is just simply left click drag in order to move them. You can select multiples by dragging a box around them. Once you've selected a box around them, you'll notice this other feature becomes available, which will automatically create a combined node between them. So multiple nodes that are selected will then be combined, and you can do this across quite a number of nodes, really. If you bring in a few more, that needs a file. So we have a whole bunch of these. So I've got 3 of them here. I grab them all and they will combine and combine yet again. To delete them, of course, just pressing the delete key. If you want to connect things, you can simply drag and drop, or you can drag and drop onto the main node, which will give you a series of options. So I have inputs, custom, mask, which are available here. And of course this output should be used only when dragging from the input to the other nodes, whereupon output will become useful. On the nodes themselves, you can click on them and you have additional features. So if we click on this, we have things that we can change. Of course, we can delete and deal with that. Some features are not yet set up. We have arrangement modes and stuff like that. That's not available yet, but we have things like style, where I can go ahead and increase the width of that. So I'm just going to show you that. You notice it gets thicker. I can do things like adjust the color. Let's go with orange. There we go, it becomes orange. I can add type to it. So change it to, let's say, a Bezier. That's here, and so now that's what I'm getting. Let's go spline, and the spline will try and do navigation. Looks kind of funky, sort of graffiti, which is neat. We'll go here and click on that again. I'll set that back to normal, and I can add text to this. Something really useful like boop, and maybe make it bold. I could change the font should I desire, and voila, there it says boop. So if you have important text information that you want to apply to that, you can do that. Thing that it was connected to, change thread dot. Not much else is changing there. So those are some things that you can mess around with. Another mode of navigation is right here. So if I hold down Control and wheel mouse, I have that here. but I can also navigate by just left clicking and dragging here, or dragging this to zoom in and out. We'll just click on that to close it again. On the side here we have our favorite used icons. We have our search option, which will filter information. So if I start typing strata, RA rather, we will get then the stratify, which I can just left click and drag and drop. I can clear that like that. Also, if I press Control Tab, that will dump me right into there automatically. So if you're more of a hotkey person, you can do that. Each one of these panels, of course, can be made smaller. And if you hover over these, of course, it'll tell you what they're called. If you want a bigger map of that, you can right click and you can see them all here with their names, which is the same as using the Add Node feature that's there. Just a warning that currently, and may be fixed in the next update, is that for some people using the Add Node has created some difficulties, but the left click drag always works. If you're not using this version, chances are it's probably been fixed. Just below that we have the different modes that we can use, and so when we click on that we've got graph and layers, which is currently off the screen, but it pulls off the bottom here. And graph mode is what we're currently in. Layer mode will appear as a series of lines just above this add node here, which are sort of like layers in Photoshop if you've used that. And basically does much the same thing, it's just that you can't interconnect them. So the graph mode is much more powerful. With different tools, if I open my erosion here, let's talk about updates. So if I go ahead and just drag and drop that here, and maybe that here, and what happens here is that for some things, you have to wait for it to update. If I were to grab these two guys here, and let's do an automatic connection. For something like this, as I drag it, you see it live update. Whereas others, you drag and let go, and you see the update. And then things like this, which has a number of different sliders that you can mess with. You don't want to watch each one update. Maybe you're looking at a recipe that somebody's put down to, do some cool erosion. You want to go ahead and make a number of different changes and get them all done. And because this takes a little bit longer to calculate in certain situations, you want to just go ahead and make those changes first and then hit apply, and then it will chew through those things and give you the end result. So once again, some are live, some will update on release, and others require changes to be made and then clicking apply to get that. With that said, when you change tessellation value, so the resolution of this, it will update all of them. With that in mind, below here we have this little button which will cancel the running process. This may not work for all nodes, but it is there to assist you with that. If I click on this button here, something cool pops up, but I don't have any specific use for it, so probably best to leave it alone. On each of these nodes there is a post process, which has a few features to do things like clamp values, do auto levels, alter the influence. Back to properties. You do of course want to create output nodes to output your information. The output nodes of course have file types. There's the full range, which will make sure that it goes from, instead of like in this case, I'm going between black to maybe like a gray value. It could be higher than this. Switching to full range would be like doing an auto levels to it. It'd be much the same kind of idea. And then of course we have color output, and then of course the file format. You can set multiples of these to then export, and of course go to the export tab. In the Export tab, we have our resolution for the build terrain, but you can do the save current, which will save the current version at the current resolution. So basically what you see in the viewport. Otherwise, you can switch to a 4K or 8K. Keep in mind that some tools still work on a scale dependent, like a resolution dependent size, and so things like certain features may become smaller as you increase the resolution of the file itself. So expect some visual differences on certain nodes. Last but not least, we have some additional features, things like dealing with the scale of our world. This is adjusting things like the visual features in the background here, where you can adjust the brightness, ambient lighting, the azimuth and altitude of that, I guess as an offset, playing with the amount of air scatter, haze, fog, etc., and of course the colors relating to those things, the ambient light and regular light. Contours is pretty straightforward. You turn that on and you get height contours, and there's some settings for those. Just turn that off. I don't currently have any favorites, so there's nothing there. And of course there aren't any extra preferences yet, so this is also blank. So I believe that is a full coverage of the overall interface of Gaea, covering the majority of the features that you need. Again, you can go back and pause any point to review some of these, but I hope it's been useful, and that's it.